Whenever I watch this scene from Repo Man, I can't help but get a little cringy inside and imagine this is what a support conversation between a battle-hardened Jagan and a young scrub Est is like.
Tense situations, kids. Get into 5 or 6 of them a day don't mean shit anymore. I mean, I've seen men stabbed, didn't mean shit. I've seen guns too, they don't mean shit. But that's when you gotta watch yourself.
For many players, a core appeal of the Fire Emblem series is its support system. Simply put, it's a system where characters have conversations with one another and receive stat bonuses. Its appeal is universal across playstyles. Players invested in Fire Emblem's RPG elements or optimizing turn counts can use them to buff characters and increase reliability. Players looking for story, character arcs, and the deep lore will have a field day reading the pages upon pages of support conversations. This video will not be about any specific supports. Instead, we will be going through the history of how the support system has developed and analyze what's made some support systems better than others. Supports began in the first Fire Emblem and have been in every game since, sans the chart-topping BS Fire Emblem. Even the spin-offs Fire Emblem Warriors and Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE have different forms of supports. It's become such a core feature and expectation of this series that Shadow Dragon, the series' first DS entry, was met with nearly universal criticism for removing support conversations. Shadow Dragon has supports, but it removed conversations, and that's our first wrinkle, our first caveat that begins to complicate matters. Before getting lost down a rabbit hole detailing all the minutiae of various support systems, we need to back up and understand why supports matter to Fire Emblem. Compared to other tactics games, Fire Emblem occupies a strange space. Like Advance Wars, Fire Emblem has Permadeath, and like Level 5's Jeanne d'Arc, Fire Emblem has a limited cast of named characters. When units die in Advance Wars, it doesn't really matter, at least in the long term. Everything is infinitely replaceable. When characters die in Jeanne d'Arc, it doesn't matter because they come back. Having to find a solution to the pernicious combination of permadeath and a limited cast, the support system provides the player with an opportunity to tip the scales in their favor. By taking advantage of supports, players can massively increase their chances to land attacks, avoid enemy attacks, or get critical hits. It's also entirely asymmetric. With the exception of a few gimmick bosses, the enemies never get to take advantage of supports. To understand just how brutally unfair this is to enemies, try playing some PvP Fire Emblem. It won't take too many sub-30 hit rates before you realize the only choice you have is to build a living statue around the throne. Support bonuses also add a deeper threat to permadeath. Fire Emblem games are mostly built around the assumption that characters, a lot of characters, will die. However, the support bonuses dying characters give makes them feel irreplaceable. If Boyd dies late in Path of Radiance, he will be replaced by the decently comparable Largo, but Boyd's death also whisks away bonuses for Oscar, Rolf, and potentially Miss, Titania, Braum, and Ulki. It's almost like they're mourning his death. That's really sad. The cool thing about being very sad is that it makes Fire Emblem armies more complex than just a list of characters acting independently. Losing or benching characters can send reverberations throughout the rest of the army. Support bonuses make characters feel unique in gameplay, and the same applies to story. Support conversations give characters lives that permadeath can actually cut short. If Joshua dies early, Marissa can replace his gameplay contributions, but she can never replace Joshua's story, as it was only his to tell. This is why Shadow Dragon's approach was so disliked. The game had support bonuses, but the lack of conversations in addition to generic playable units, and the game's desaturated lifeless character designs, makes most of the characters feel generic and replaceable. Supports grant permadeath more urgency for each individual character, and they also give each character the chance to have their own story. With casts as massive as these, it's hard for Kieran, or Geese, or Belf to get any time to develop. Supports give them that chance. Obviously, supports weren't always like this. Throughout the series, supports develop slowly and in many different directions. There are two major types of supports in the series: proximity supports and pair-up supports. Within proximity supports, we can further divide these between hidden supports and conversation supports. Here's where each game falls based on their primary support system. You might notice 3 houses on here twice. Don't worry about that, it's a very weird game. Proximity supports are games where supports are built and the bonuses are given based on how close characters are to one another. In the hidden support games, supports are all automatic, providing hidden bonuses that the player is never directly told about. The proximity of characters to one another giving bonuses has been in the series since its inception. The triangle attack in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is an early step in the series trying to build unique characters in a system that otherwise makes them disposable. This is a very cumbersome system, and many might not even consider the triangle attack a form of a support system. At the very least, it's a proto-support that gets simplified into more manageable forms in Gaiden. At the very least, it's a proto-support that gets simplified into a more recognizable form in Gaiden, the wild second game of the series. In the final map, if Celica stands next to Om, he will have a 100% critical hit rate. In effect, it's the triangle attack, which also features in Gaiden. This is still the support system in its infancy. In terms of both available characters and time, Gaiden's support system is restrictive. Where supports really begin to matter is Mystery of the Emblem, where there are many pairs of characters that provide support bonuses. The bonuses are a very nice plus 10 hit, avoid, and critical. All supports are one way, Marth to Sita, Sita to Agama, Midia to Astrum. This exact system would be transplanted to Thracia 776, where supports would become a complex web of dozens of supporting partners, some one way, some both ways, some double as effective. This type of support system is great from a gameplay perspective. As we'll see later, some support systems are extremely cumbersome to utilize, like the GBA supports, where even getting the chance to use it takes copious amounts of grinding. The supports in Thracia are available right from the get-go. No investment necessary. It sounds like a scam, or that it wouldn't be very good, but the benefits really are excellent. These instantaneous supports give Thracia a gameplay role that the series only really ever sees again during the 3DS era, which is the support bot. Like characters brought along in Awakening and Fate solely for the purpose of boosting another's stats, characters in Thracia can see their use be based entirely around their supports. This particularly helps characters like Leaf, or characters with similar abilities like Charm or Leadership skills. I think it's very sweet of the game to give Glade something to do. He's still going to just sit there, but at least it's now with big plus 3 hit energy. This system is splendid to play around with and deeply satisfying, but it has one massive problem. If you're looking for story arcs, progress, or any sense of growth, then you're going to have to shop elsewhere. Supports are completely static. All that characters have are their pre-existing relationships that, because of the limited space of the Super Famicom, go almost entirely unexplored. Growth, change, dynamism, it's not necessary. Characters don't need arcs or complex personalities, but Thracia's support system dooms almost the entire cast to a fate of anonymity and endless fan theory crafting. All Fire Emblem memes are deserving of death to varying degrees of severity, but the one that gets the closest to some kind of truth is the meme comparing a character's actual amount of dialogue to the amount of dialogue willed into existence by fan imagination. We don't know who many of these people are, and we never will. It's sad, in a way, expressing the idea that war is only fightable if you strip the people you're commanding of their personhood and turn them into a machine of killing and numbers. This, however, is not a theme Fire Emblem explores except by accident. These are goofball anime games that, once you invested in their cast beyond simple emergent narratives and unit feel. In pursuit of rounding out the characters, we end up with supports in the Binding Blade. The Binding Blade is such a weird game. The previous 3 Fire Emblem games were frantically moving all over the place, changing and adding new features and mechanics. While not in a neat linear fashion, the series was going through the typical arc of sequels being more complex than their predecessors. But then the Binding Blade happens. Cramming itself onto the less powerful Game Boy Advance and needing to appeal to handheld sensibilities, the Binding Blade is forced into the rare situation of needing to simplify and reduce. This is a very difficult process, and the road for Fire Emblem to perfect the simplified form would be bumpy, but the simplification would not be equal across all aspects of the game. One area where the Binding Blade is defiant is its support system. Gone are the automatic supports of Thracia, and in are supports that you have to build over the course of the game. This isn't entirely new to the series. The 4th entry, Genealogy of the Holy War, had supports that had to be built, but supports were limited to pairing up one man and one woman. The Binding Blade takes a more polyamorous approach. Supports can be built between a character and a pool of other characters. Support points are built by 2 characters ending their turns next to each other. After enough points are built between 2 characters, they can have a conversation, and then from there on, they will give each other stat bonuses in battle as long as they're within 3 spaces of one another. These bonuses increase each time a character has a conversation, and each support line has 3 total conversations or levels. These bonuses are really, really good, and as a result, each character is limited to 5 total support conversations. The only way to get more is for one of the characters to die. This is a really cool system for a couple of reasons. The first is that it gives characters a chance to have personalities. Many of the side characters that would only have a handful of lines in the previous games now have dedicated scenes where the player can watch them grow or learn about their lives. For story and character aficionados, this is a goldmine, and one that would only become more rich as the Game Boy Advance era continued, with intelligence systems getting a better feel for crafting support conversations as the GBA cycle ran its course. For RPGers and people who love to build characters, this system offers a surprising amount of depth. Until the branching promotions in the Sacred Stones, there wasn't a ton of character building in Fire Emblem. Outside of the wild and wacky world of Genealogy of the Holy War, most Fire Emblem characters are either good or become good after leveling them up a bunch. Brute Force is about the only option to build characters. Level them up and hope their stats work out. The Binding Blade is mostly the same, but the new support system adds a new layer of customization to the standard Fire Emblem formula. Each character in the game has an affinity. That affinity determines what stat bonuses are given out by that character. Let's say I have a bad character that I want to use. Sophia. Yeah, that's crappy. If I were playing a typical Fire Emblem game, Thracia, Mystery, Shadow Dragon, I wouldn't have much control over Sophia outside of grinding experience points on her. However, now, thanks to support affinities, I can build Sophia into several different things. Thanks to her dark affinity that provides boosts to avoid and critical, I can make her a crit killer, or a dodge tank, or if I were actually insane enough to use Sophia, I would focus on her hit. Sophia has a tough time making contact with anything. Her low skill, luck, and weapon hit makes even doing the bare minimum questionable. Because her dark affinity also gives hit, I can identify other supporting units that give her hit. Igren and Ray. By developing these supports, Sophia will be blessed with up to plus 25 hit. In addition to the benefits those supports provide to avoid critical and critical avoid, Sophia is now built in a more unique way than what standard level ups allow. Now she's much more reliable at doing the bare minimum, meaning that leveling her up becomes much less of a slog. At least, much less of one type of slog. To build supports on Sophia, or any other character, involves just a little smidgen of grind. Since support points are gained by characters ending their turn next to each other, that doesn't give you many opportunities to build supports. There's just not many turns where you'll have the chance to end characters next to each other. But that's okay. How many turns could it take? 10? 15 turns? How about 60? I was bored and decided to do my best chart party impersonation. Here's a graph showing the average amount of turns it takes each character to reach an A support with all of their potential support partners, with all of their individual values lined up along the Y-axis. This is horrifying. There are a couple of things to talk about here. For one, the high turn count required to develop supports makes sense, at least on its surface. Support bonuses are extremely powerful, and having them take a long time to develop means that they are, in a sense, soft-locked behind certain points of the game. Some supports do have a faster yield time. Lance and Alan only take 15 turns to get to C rank and then 30 to get to B. Roy and Lelina only take 1 turn to get to C and then 15 to get to B. The vast majority of pairings sit in that 60-turn hellscape per conversation, and, for all practical purposes, leveling supports in GBA Fire Emblem can be summarized as this. Even in the runs where I've been more conscious of building support points during maps, it always devolves into this maddening support grind by the throne. The Binding Blade tries to disincentivize this by placing a hard cap on how many support points can be gained in one map, 120 per chapter, but that number is so high as to be meaningless. Everyone who wants supports for either story or character building will have turn counts that, like the tide, will be compelled to rise. It's unavoidable, and also endlessly dumb. If the idea being the high amount of points required to build supports and the 120 point per map limit is that it prevents players from having access to the benefits too early, then the expectation would be that late game characters would build supports faster. But no. Some late game characters like Juno do, but some characters like Nime, Yodel, and Corel have even longer drives to A supports than early game characters like Walt and Marcus. Looking at this graph, it looks like most characters float around the same average turns per A support, and that's kind of true. The problem is that all of these characters join at different times, so here's another graph that more accurately illustrates the thoughtlessness of this system. This chart tells us, on average, how many support points a character needs to build in a chapter to get an A support by the final map. The way I calculated this was by averaging the total turns for an A support that each character has with their earliest possible support partners. So for Roy, this is calculated using his Marcus, Walt, Allen, and Lance support. That number is then divided by the number of chapters you have to build these supports. Basically, this is the bare minimum you have to do per map to get an A support by the end of the game. This chart isn't perfect. To go further, you could break this up with every support pairing in the game and then map them by chapter to see the most accurate trend. But this chart illustrates the simple fact that the deeper you go into the game, the more you have to go out of your way in order to get supports. I especially want to shout out Corel, whose A supports with Zeiss, Noah, and Rutger each take 199 turns to build. Corel joins midway through chapter 23. There are 25 chapters in the game. That means you will need to get an average of nearly 50 support points per map in order to get an A support. If you want to get the Corel Noah support, you would have to dedicate 199 turns to that support across chapters 23 and 24. There is no point. Your reward is a bunch of buffs for one chapter and a series of conversations that really shouldn't be taking place. Corel, a silent killer, drawn out by coincidence, leaves us only with the hollowness of a soul corrupted by violence. He doesn't want to get to know people. He is a recluse by design, paying for his bloodlust with solitude. It's kind of beautiful in a way, and represents one of the few benefits of this ghastly system for building supports. There are hundreds of support combinations in GBA Fire Emblem, and by sheer force of scale, some character can end up being found in these grindfests. The Blazing Sword and the Sacred Stones improved on the Binding Blade support system, but only by lowering the turn requirement for most supports. Both of these games remove the point limit on each map. I love this because it tells me that they just gave up. Instead of meaningfully fixing the system, they now just let you get all of your grinding done in one massive session. There are a couple of supports hidden in this giant mess of a grind that are worth pointing out. Pint and Luis both have the lowest turn requirement in the game because neither of them can get an A support with anyone. They come with a pre-built A support between the two of them. This pre-existing history used to be one of the only characteristics of supports in Thracia, but in GBA it only exists here. Having more pre-built supports like this would add more flavor to these games, while also allowing character histories to have more immediate gameplay effects. Renault, which I am pronouncing Renault and not Renault because it will upset some people, is in a similar situation to Corel. His A supports take anywhere between 120 and 240 turns to get, and he's around for less than 3 chapters. Given his character, it makes sense. But my favorite is this one, the 120 turn Marcus Merlinus A support. Good friend of the show, Midnight Cowboy, made a video talking about how Fire Emblem uses its mechanics to play jokes on the player. There is no better joke than this obscure support. See, Marcus is one of the most powerful characters in the game, and Merlinus is a tent. Locked down to the beginning of every map for most of the game, building support means fielding Marcus for him to do almost nothing except uselessly stand next to a tent for 120 turns, Marcus can't even take advantage of the support once he gets more than 3 spaces away from Merlinus, the guy who can't move for most of the game. Absolutely ridiculous. The Sacred Stones would be the best implementation of this system. The longest supports in the game take 120 turns, and those are fairly rare, but calling it better is burying the lead. It's like trying to use your 1997 Ford Aspire at Talladega. I suppose there are some points for participation. This support system would be meaningfully updated for the first time in Path of Radiance, where I contend supports were the most well-designed. In Path of Radiance, supports provide bonuses roughly equal to GBA Fire Emblem supports, but they are now built automatically by having characters deployed on the same map together. If you deploy Oscar and Tanith together, they get 1 point. It takes 9 maps together for them to reach an A support. This system means that the player will never have to consciously grind for supports. It also means that supports are properly paced based on when characters join. Ike and Titania join in Chapter 1, so it takes them an absurd 26 chapters to reach an A support. Bastion and Lucia both join very late, so it only takes them 3 chapters to build an A support. This combination of being automatic and well-paced makes them a lot of fun, but it's this game, the 4th consecutive with a 5 support limit, where supports begin to be frustrating for the story crowd. If you want to get as much story as you can, each character only being eligible for 5 conversations per playthrough places a significant limit on how much of the story can be seen in one playthrough. While today's internet makes this a mostly moot point, playing Fire Emblem in 2004 must have certainly come with its frustrations, especially with the support completion screen always being there. Always laughing at you. Better minds would say that being able to read all of the conversations would be good since very few supports are mutually exclusive. Better minds prevailed, and then supports became a mess. Some balancing act has to be done to make sure that unlimited supports don't allow you to bowl over the entire game without a second thought. Radiant Dawn was the first to try. In that game, basically every character can support every other character with no limit. However, you can only have 1 active support at any given time. This means that the effects of supports are fairly limited, but since supports reset when you change partners, there's no meaningful conversations here, and this lack of character building really hurts the characters original to Radiant Dawn. I'm entirely indifferent to this system, so indifferent that the only way I know how to express this indifference is to not even look up how the support system works or how supports are built. I just don't care, and that's the #1 rule of a video essay. In Echoes and Three Houses, supports are built by characters doing actions near each other. There's other details, but what matters is that they will be more organically built while playing, and that once there's nothing left to do on a map, there is no way to grind supports. In Echoes, the support bonuses are all decent, and because of the limited cast, these bonuses are always useful without ever getting out of hand. With Echoes, I want to call special attention to the Fae Alm support because its stat bonuses are interesting. This is the only support in the series that actually lowers a stat. As the support develops, Fae loses a void in exchange for more critical. As Alm rejects her, she abandons reliability and embraces chaos. I can dig it. What I can dig a lot less is Three Houses' support system. Three Houses has a gargantuan amount of supports, and as a result, the bonuses are very small. The bonuses are almost all uniform across support pairs and are given out through the nebulous linked attacks. The general meh feeling I get from Three Houses' support system is partly because of that uniformity. With a small number of exceptions like Sylvain Felix, most supports don't modify damage, and none of them modify critical or critical avoid. As well, activating supports requires that a character either be supporting another by being an adjutant or by being in range to attack the enemy themselves. That last part feels like garble to even say, and this linked attack system is something I didn't even understand until my 3rd playthrough, despite it being one of the first tutorials in the game. Because of this, it's possible to go through the entirety of Three Houses without ever noticing support bonuses. And even when you do notice, who cares? Maybe you do, but I don't. That was a mouthful, and somehow, we're not done. Everyone's got something to say about everything, and every Fire Emblem fan is going to tell you a thing or two about Pair Up, the flagship feature of Awakening and Fates. These 2 games, which are actually 4 games, represent one era. A deeply controversial era. This 2-game, 4-game stretch was a massive shakeup after the series had fallen on tough times, and despite the cloud that loomed over Awakening's development, it's amazing just how much they nailed the support system. Because 3DS Emblem opinions breed faster than Edelgard Dimitri discourse, I'll lay it out right here and say that what I'm specifically praising is how supports are built and how bonuses are given and received. This isn't about follow-up attacks and guarding or riding or whatever. Supports are built in these games by doing actions while paired up, a new feature that dramatically changes the gameplay flow. Pair up occurs when you either stack 2 units together or when one solo character performs an action while adjacent to another character. There's almost never a situation where you don't want to be using pair up in some form. Like Path of Radiance, supports will be built naturally by just playing the game. The player is going to see so many supports. So many. Sometimes you even get to read about how Frederick showed everyone Crom's cock. This is a great boon to the story nuts, and hey, they're completely optional for the gameplay buzzards. In gameplay, support bonuses are activated by being paired up. Without getting into all the minutiae, characters paired up in the submissive position give big stat bonuses to their dominant partners. I could get into the exact math behind these bonuses, but I'm not here to regurgitate the Serenus Force page. I'm here to give the analysis. The Radiant Dawn problem of characters not getting the chance to have meaningful conversations is circumvented here while also limiting how much benefit supports can have. There's no multiple support stacking here for individual actions. Before Awakening, activating supports was inherently limiting to some degree. It restricted where you could place your characters since you had to be mindful of having your characters within 3 spaces of one another. These limitations are of course not mandatory and they encourage some more thoughtful play, so it's not bad. Rather, it's impressive that Awakening has extremely contextual support bonuses and bakes them into the system so thoroughly that supporting actually increases movement options. Pairing up involves pairing up, separating, giving, and taking characters. These options significantly increase mobility. Supports throughout most of the series have a reputation as being the way to play it safe, because even though you're still playing with random numbers, you're doctoring the numbers in your favor. Awakening and Fates instead make supports work so that mastery over using them allows you to be more aggressive and insane. I love aggression. I love insanity. And like Harry Dean Stanton so wisely told us earlier, I love tense situations. Supports make it so they don't mean shit. We didn't get to talk about every game in depth. We don't have forever, and that benefits me since many people will comment requesting more or expressing disappointment that there wasn't more about their favorite game. We are at the end of the road, or at least as far as I'm willing to walk this road. Having looked at all these support systems, I'm now left wondering what can be done differently to make supports better or more interesting. Across all of the games where you build supports with conversations, there is one bizarre trend that seems to be in every single game multiple times. Characters who have confrontational supports, but then, for some reason, like each other more. Everyone makes fun of this, and rightly so. It's weird, and it's anti-Ludo narrative. A potential solution to this is one-way supports. Thracia has shown that these can work, and they can be embedded into the story. In Shozukaga's spiritual successor to Fire Emblem, Tearing Saga, Chronicles of War, Hero Utana. Sometimes support conversations will happen, and only one character will get benefits. For example, Creeper Cav Arcus gets to hit on Estelle, and she rejects him. Trying to impress and show off in front of her, he will receive a plus 4% hit and avoid from her, but she, not welcoming his support, receives nothing. In a raw gameplay sense, this exchange isn't fair, but it builds character and makes the army feel more organic and alive. Three Houses somewhat addresses the "these characters don't really like each other" problem by capping some supports at their B rank, but because I'm in a crazy mood, this could be taken further. With the exception of the Alm-Fae support, all supports in Fire Emblem make the participating characters better in all relevant stats. It could as well be possible that supports between characters who hate each other could make them worse to better infuse story and gameplay. Now, calm down, calm down. This idea is ludicrous. It would disincentivize players from getting supports, everyone would hate it, and no one would have fun. However, it does give me the chance to bang away at my drum that Fire Emblem needs to have a spin-off, or just a whole-ass mainline entry that is modeled after a sports simulator franchise mode. Why? Why not? The other recommendation I would have is that characters should come with more built-in supports. It's hard to imagine that there isn't already some support between Guy and Matthew or Oscar and Kieran. The series dabbled with this by having bond supports in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, but I would like to see this concept explored further and allow bond supports to develop. It's also not hard to imagine interesting situations where bond supports are either developed or lost over the course of the game. For spoiler reasons, Leaf goes from 0 leadership stars to 1 to 2, and then back to 1. This type of mechanic would have interesting story implications rather than the random and arbitrary biorhythm in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, a self-vibe check mechanic that exists only to make players stress. And look, I don't know, maybe one day I'll be desperate enough to make a How Fire Emblem Balances Biorhythm video. Maybe one day Fire Emblem tweeters will have personalities, I don't know. Regardless, I think the one great part of supports that transcends any of their other qualities is that they give the series its identity, or at the very least, a more concrete identity. So much of the series' longevity comes from its characters, and hopefully they keep improving the ways players get to interact with the characters in gameplay and story. Or, they could go the Shadow Dragon route and make everyone sad. But then again, I'm always sad, so what difference does it make? Videos like this are only made possible by the generous support of patrons and YouTube members. If you would like to support the channel, please follow the links in the description. But first, a shout out to those supporters: BMO McGrim, Kate Rose, Dector A, Est Juice, Jacobra, Sabrina Sable, Starry, That Icarus Kid, 2 Clutch, Vivian Aladren, Yokai, Zoop Lord, Anime Go-Go-Go, Boots 42, L Brady, Henny G, L Brown, Liar Fan, Nin, Obsessive Fool, Uther 007, Will Brock, Zetetic, Almandite, Ashkomi, Bessapedal, Cristobal Herrero Iglesias, E-Dub, Eltson, Forrest McFarland, Gilgamessed Up, Hayden Quigley Herrick, Melissa G, Nathaniel Peters, Puzzles B, Quoros, Reflect, Ruin, Sylvester, Sexy Potato, Stephanie Roman, Tarek, Tectonic Improv, William Clemens, Anton Nielsen, Artur, Dabney, Danny Doyle, Danielle Kalaskis, Dedumi, Faye Nedius, Frank West, Gawain, G. Merck, James Welsh, Jameson, John Miller, Kinsey, Lil Beats, Lord Mudkip, Lou Rios, Lucas DM, Magma Ram, Max, Michael Kraus, Mikey Picky 22, Moderation Dev, Noah Fedderson, Noe, Number Wang, Rosenbud, Saint Rawberry, Shup, Slammerai, Some Guy 6470, Thomas G. Grow, T-Kloss 45, Tough Emily, Whooperfloss, Zachary Parrish, Adora Bunny, A Sexy Potato, Dector A, Liar Fan, Swordlocked, Rad Spoony Bard, Zoop Lord, Cesar Gonzalez, Moose, Doran Brooks, Reto, Feyu, and Violeman. Liam? Lee? Let me know how it's pronounced in the comments section. Anyway, thank you all so much for your generous support, and I'll see you all in the next video essay.